We've read the DNA of many thousands of people from all over this planet. We feed those DNA letters to a computer and we say, computer, if we give you a palette of K colors, let's say 10 colors, look at each person's genome, and they're a thin thread in this tapestry. Look at each person's genome. Look for patterns, clusters of genetic spellings that match up between that person and others in the group, and pick a color, and color in the mix for that person, the likeliest mix of their 10, in this case, ancestral pools. So here we have folks in a very small patch of the planet, and actually not that far from the Arabian Peninsula itself. It's, sort of a coast of it. But within that region, actually folks look very different from the way that many folks look on the peninsula itself. So these are Levantine people. So for example, if we look here, we see Egyptians. They have some of the lemon yellow near the top that we saw in Moroccans. We could think of that as maybe a North African ancestral pool of some kind. They have a lot of this green that we'll talk about. And they have some of the gold that we saw in the Arabian Peninsula, but a lot less of it. Moving across to, say, Syrians, we see less of the yellow, less of the North African, some more mixed in of red that we'll talk about. And if we move across to Lebanese Muslims, we see a little bit more of that red again. If we look across to Lebanese Christians and Druze, similar mix, a little bit less of the red, a little bit less of the brown at the top, and a little bit less of the West African pink. But everybody in this whole region of the Levant, regardless of religion, their mixes look fairly similar. So we could ask a question, what if we look at what's common to these different Levantine groups? The gold at the bottom, the big green in the middle, the brown at the top, and the sort of laced lemon throughout together. And especially, for example, if we look at ancient Levantines, this is the actual bodies of people who were found preserved well in Sidon in the Levant about 3,700 years ago. Their genomes can be read now, and this is what they look like. The hummus is there, folks. The hummus is already there 3,700 years ago. It's basically a nice blend of much of the same ingredients we saw. Not quite as spiced, but it's much of the same ingredients. And if we look today at their neighbors, 60 miles away, modern Palestinians, the hummus looks very similar. There's about 3,700 years worth of added spice that's come in from various parts of the world. But basically, modern Palestinians' genomes look a lot like ancient Levantine genomes 3,700 years ago. Now, why does this matter? It matters for several reasons. First, as we know now, truth matters a lot. Truth matters in all contexts, medical contexts, all kinds of social contexts. But it matters in science, too, in genetics. And so we need to get our truth out about what we know about the past from genetics to pool together with what's known otherwise. But it matters for more personal and poignant reasons, too, because as an Ashkenazi Jew, as a Jew, I've come to see people in my own part of that tapestry, the ones whose mixes are most close to mine, the threads I can reach out and pull by a phone call. I've started to see misinformation spread in ways that really, really pain me and hurt others. This is time to set the record straight genetically to try to get that truth out for that vital reason. So let's talk about that. One of the fun things about science is that it's interesting, and you never know who might weigh in on a given new genetics paper. In this case, we have a tweet from Benjamin Netanyahu, who I guess has a lot of time on his hands now. He's tweeting that a new study of DNA recovered from an ancient Philistine site near Ashkelon in Israel confirms what we know from the Bible, that the origin of the Philistines is in southern Europe. Now, this has a lot of dog whistle meaning, because people know that Philistine in Arabic comes from a Roman word that was taken from an earlier people called the Philistines, and it became our word Palestine. So Bibi here is letting you think that a DNA study has found that Palestinian people are European, which would have political implications for land rights and things like that. Well, let's look at the actual study that he's talking about. So ancient DNA sheds light on the genetic origins of early Iron Age Philistines. Now we're talking about 3,300 years ago, so later than 3,700. And they looked at the DNA, and here's what the study says, verbatim. We find that all three Ashkelon populations derive most of their ancestry from the local Levantine gene pool. I don't know if Bibi missed that sentence, but he may have. So hopefully he'll watch the talk. But in any case, that's the truth. You've seen it already. 3,700 years ago, it was already true. 3,300 years ago, what the paper found was that there was a little pulse of immigration, or maybe even refugees. We don't know who they were. Families in Ashkelon, for a brief period of time, some of the individuals were like part European, part Levantine. And they mixed into the fold. They stirred into the hummus more spice. That's the story of that paper that Bibi is trying to spin into a much bigger story that would actually disenfranchise and really leave without a homeland a whole people. So let's talk about that canard, because it recurs not just through Bibi. We hear it from many quarters now. So the Australian Jewish Association, weighing in on history as they are wont to do, the term Philistine means invaders. Well, actually, the term Hebrews originally meant outsiders as well. So lots of ancient terms for peoples that get dubbed by somebody else happen to mean something like outsider, right? This happens a lot in human history. And Bibi goes on to say, well, this is all well and good, but Palestinians whose ancestors came from the Arabian Peninsula to the land of Israel thousands of years later. Well, we just saw that's absolutely not true. Palestinian genomes look very Levantine and very different from Saudi genomes, from Yemeni genomes, from peninsular Arab genomes. So the facts are Palestinian DNA shows consistently deep and thick local roots. By thick, I mean that most of the ancestry is from right there. There's a little spice, but it's mostly just Levantine. So think today, if you don't know enough people from a group that you fear, that you think may want to disappear you, please just meet 5 of them. Get to know them individually as artists, scientists, activists, whatever they may do. They may have all different human paths like you've heard today. Get to know them as people and as family.
These are the same people who are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. It's their land that they want to keep. They were the ones who were there first. They're the ones being cleansed from their land by the Israeli. They were living there all along. And for generations back into antiquity, when a bunch of Russians and Lithuanians and Germans and New Yorkers showed up and said the land belonged to them. The actual source is David Ben-Gurion himself.
You're saying that Muslims always
had been there. That's right, because here's why. Because when the Muslims came and took over that land, they did not cleanse the land of the people who lived there. And they did not invade it with a giant occupying force to replace them. All they did was take them over and tax them. And then the deal was, if you convert to Islam, you get a tax cut. Basically, you pay less. And the local people all converted to Islam. But so these are the same people who are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews. And the source for this is David Ben-Gurion himself. Ben-Gurion says the ancient Hebrews never left. So you can't take a farmer from his soil. They were there the whole time. And so what was happening was the descendants of the ancient Hebrews who had stayed in Palestine were being replaced by the descendants of the ancient Hebrews who'd gone off to Europe, and then their descendants came home. As though there's no statute of limitations, and 3,000 years later you can come and say, this is my land, you can't live here.